Can the seats get hot for Billy Napier at Florida and Mario Cristobal at Miami? And who needs that win more in week one?
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the Everydayers, and thank you so much for making this epic Locked On College crossover your first listen today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. He is Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. On this episode, we'll make the case for why Florida is going to win that week one matchup, why Miami is going to win that week one matchup, top storylines and concerns from fall training camp so far. But Brandon, there's so many narratives around these coaches, and I wanted to start with that because I get asked from time to time, could the seat get hot for Mario Cristobal? Is it warm already? And for Florida, gosh, I'm sure you get that question on Billy Napier all the time. Florida, coming off a losing season from last year, they've got the toughest schedule in the country this season. What's really going on with Billy Napier, and is the seat already hot?
Yeah, I think the last thing Florida Gators fans want to hear about anymore is that damn schedule. But it's what you're going to have to deal with because, believe it or not, your schedule goes into how many games you win. And how many games you win goes into if your coach keeps his job. I think that it's a little complex for Florida. I think you win 6 games, you keep your job flat out. I think that if you win 5 games, but you look significantly improved, you keep your job maybe. Probably depends on the recruiting class at the time as well. But, if you win 5 games or less, but you still have the blunders you had last year, you have the 2 special teams players wearing the same jersey number. You have multiple times 10 players on the field for special teams. You have not showing up on the road, a la Utah, a la Kentucky, a la Vanderbilt 2022. You have those kinds of moments still. Cut bait, because if you're not improving the simple things or the organizational things, why do you have an organizational head coach?
Right. Yeah, and I think the case for Mario Cristobal, I don't think it's not impossible for the seat to become warm this year, and I'll explain how that could happen. But I don't think Miami's anywhere close to that right now because something folks have to remember is the man is heading into year 3 of a 10-year, $80 million total contract. And something that I emphasize, Brandon, I think Miami fans understand this, but I emphasize to the national folks who don't have that inside the bubble perspective. When Mario Cristobal was given the job, he was given the job with the understanding, it's the reason why they gave him a 10-year contract was, we understand that you want to completely tear this down to build this up. And that's not making an excuse for something like not taking the knee. It's not to say he's done a perfect job since he's been at Miami, but it's evident what they're doing with the roster overhaul, the culture overhaul, and they gave Mario Cristobal that job with the understanding that, we're looking for sustainable long-term results, not just short-term flash in the pan type of stuff. So both of his first 2 seasons have been disappointing on the field in terms of 5 wins the first season, 7 wins the second season. There should have been a bigger jump, in my opinion, from year 1 to year 2, but there was a jump from year 1 to year 2. They're expecting another jump this year. And so when you talked about how to measure success for Billy Napier, given Florida's schedule, if he were to win 6 games, you could argue that that's kind of a successful season. The over-under for Florida is 4.5. For Miami, the FanDuel over-under.
Had to throw that in. You just had to throw in the 4.5.
Hey, FanDuel is an amazing partner here of the Locked On Network. I want to make sure we throw out their numbers, but Miami's over-under this year, their schedule is significantly easier than Florida's, is 9.5. Right. So I'm not saying he's got to win more than 9 games to keep his job or anything like that. But, if Cristobal were to only win 5 or 6 games this year, then that could put him on the warm or the hot seat pretty quickly. But I think as long as there is an improvement from 7 wins last season and you show a continued upward trajectory, especially with the way he's been recruiting and the way he's been working the portal, the organizational build is looking like a success, at least off the field. It's got to start looking like more of a success on the field. So to answer my own question, I think it would take a pretty catastrophic season to put Mario Cristobal on the hot seat this year. And so, Brandon, anything else, you want to add? Because I know that I talked about Mario Cristobal, the buyout would be incredibly high. What about for Billy Napier? If there were to be a decision made to hit the eject button, what would that look like financially?
Yeah, I do think that when we talk about the Billy Napier buyout, that's one of the things that will keep him relatively safe because his agent did a damn good job. I'll tell you that. If Billy Napier is fired at any point without cause, he is owed 85% of his remaining total contract value, which, that's one of those things where we hear often, oh, well, if you just wait till next year, then you're going to save $9 million or $10 million or whatever amount that you're going to save. Not really with Billy Napier's case. I do think that when you look at just what you'll spend over the entirety of the contract with that buyout, no matter what, you are paying him at least 85% of his total original contract. So you're saving a few million here and there, which is obviously a few million is a few million. But when you take into account that you've just finished paying Dan Mullen's buyout, then you have Billy Napier's buyout adding on to it, and then you have whatever new head coach that you're probably going to have to pay his buyout and then his new contract. I do think financials absolutely goes into it. Look, I know that there's a lot of Florida Gators fans that go, if you win 6 games, get the hell out. I don't disagree with you necessarily. Like I think that, this is the University of Florida, and I think that's where the fatigue kind of comes in for Florida Gators fans. I don't care about winning 6 games. This is Florida. We should be winning more games than that. Yada, yada, yada. Yes, this is the University of Florida. I don't care who's in front of you. Beat them. That's what Florida's done when they're at their best. That's what every team does when they're a good program. Don't care who's in front of you. Beat them. Reality of the situation, you're still a rebuilding program. You've got what I think is the hardest schedule I've ever seen in college football. You have 11 Power 4 games and 1 FCS game. Literally not even a Group of 5 game on the schedule. It's tough. Reality of the situation, it's expensive to get rid of him. And you've got the toughest schedule in a year where you just won 5 games last year. You're still rebuilding. If you can win 6 games, name me 6 easy wins on that schedule because I can't do it. So I don't see how it's.
I can only name you one. What's Sanford? That's the only. That's the only.
Florida beat them 70-52 last time they played. So wow. It's a lot there. But I don't see an easy. I think that's the only easy game on the schedule. And I think that's what makes this schedule so tough is that not that you're playing the best team in the country week in, week out. You don't get a freaking break once you start these games. And so I think that the buyout, the schedule, whether or not Gators fans want to hear it or not, it's true. It goes into the evaluation process of, do you have the right coach?
I don't know how seriously y'all take the Jaden Rashada lawsuit. Like if you think that could, if that could be harmful to Napier or not. But if I could put my tinfoil hat on, I wonder if that lawsuit does gain some traction, because you had mentioned, if they fire Napier without cause, do you think maybe that Rashada lawsuit could become a reason to fire him with cause if the results don't play out on the field?
Yeah, I think that could be a reason. There is the reported evidence of they have a recorded conversation, but it's a 2-party state. So recorded conversations get thrown out unless you have permission from both sides. And couldn't imagine that he would agree to that. So assuming that that's not admissible in court, but I'm curious if it gets introduced in that lawsuit, could Florida then use it as a reason to fire him with cause now that it's out, or if it gets leaked, whatever, if it gets ruled inadmissible, if it gets leaked, could they use it? I'm not sure. I think that they look into that if they decided that they did want to fire him. I don't think it'll happen, but if they did want to fire him, I think that they would look into that. Or if it does get ruled admissible for whatever reason, I think that, it would absolutely be something where they go, well, we can get out of it without that 85% if we want to. It's absolutely something they would consider, I think.
We still have so much coming up on this Locked On crossover episode. We're on Locked On Gators. We're on Locked On Canes. I want to get to, when we come back, who needs this more between Mario Cristobal, Miami, Billy Napier, the Florida Gators, and top storylines on both sides from fall training camp so far, as we're just over 2 weeks away from this game actually happening, which is so exciting. So, my friends, you want to keep it locked right here. We are only getting started on this Locked On Canes, Locked On crossover episode. And we're only getting started with FanDuel. Guys, we've been making money all summer long. Olympics, Summer League basketball, don't judge me, international soccer. There's been so much action happening on the FanDuel app, and now we're getting football back. I mean, there is NFL preseason going on for what that's worth, but meaningful college football is starting in just over a week, and you can get all of it at FanDuel.com. And by the way, this summer, it's still summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. And yeah, you can already lock in your wagers for that Miami at Florida game. Miami favored by 2.5 points. The over-under is 54.5. If you want to bet Florida plus 2.5, Miami minus 2.5, you can find all of that right there. FanDuel.com. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
I don't know if you know this. Yeah, it's time. We are 2 weeks away from the Florida Gators opening their season hosting the Miami Hurricanes. And I gotta look fresh for it, you know? I gotta look fresh. We gotta have some Gator gear. Gotta have comfy Gator gear that's pretty breathable. You don't know who I'm talking about yet? That's right. I'm talking about Home Field, the exclusive apparel sponsor of Locked On Gators. And we got the can't miss kickoff 2024. Yeah, it's that time. So you got football boxes, coaches' jackets, bomber jackets, Champs Week, and add 5 new schools to the Home Field roster. They got everything. They got Pepperdine, they got Toledo, they got everything. The highlight of the campaign, Home Field's football boxes. 55 schools will get a box filled with exclusive items. 3 never before seen items for your school, not available anywhere else. You can get a platinum box VIP, so you can get a hat, a ringer, you can get a koozie, 20% off early access. Just saying, they're out now. Go get it. They will sell out soon. So go get it now. And if you want to save a little bit of money, just a little bit, I don't know, I like saving money. You can put in code GATOR24 and save some money with homefieldapparel.com.
Thank you so much for making this Locked On crossover episode your first listen and your first watch today. We're free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Make sure for your second listen, you check out Locked On College Football. Our guy Spencer McLaughlin, who hosts that show, he's taking you all around the national college football scene. I know he has been and will continue to be talking about this opening season game between Miami and Florida. So check out Locked On College Football wherever you get your podcasts. So Brandon, I'll give the Miami perspective first. Now, obviously, I would never, ever say that a game between Miami and Florida isn't important. It is super important for Miami. This is a rivalry game that, going back to the 80s used to be a regular thing. It hasn't been a regular thing since 1987, but they do recruit a lot of the same players. There are, a lot of in-state rivalries. Everybody's got friends who's a Gator fan or a Miami fan or vice versa. And for Miami, this could set the tone for their season. If they were to lose this Florida game to open up the year, you don't know what that could do for their momentum before they hit the ACC schedule. It could be the difference. Losing to Florida could be the difference between an 11-1 type of season or, an 8-4 type of season. So this game is supremely important. It's also an opportunity for both teams on national TV, early season game, to really captivate audiences around the country. So this is an important one for Miami. At the same time, though, just given the schedules that we've talked about, Miami has a relatively favorable schedule on paper. Miami could lose this game and theoretically could still run the table or come close to that the rest of the way. Florida State's going to be a very tough game for Miami. Whereas for Florida, Miami is not the toughest game on Florida's schedule on paper. So you lose that Miami game, Brandon, you start to wonder, who can we beat?
Yeah, I think that I'm torn on it, and maybe you can help me here because genuinely, I'm torn on thinking of this as for Miami. If you lose this game, you don't get a chance to prove yourself as an actually good program again until that Florida State game. Because every other team that you play between Florida and Florida State, everyone's going to look at that and say, well, you're going to be favored by a bit. Like not just 2.5. You're going to be favored by probably a touchdown plus in every other game after that. And so you should be handling those teams. If you lose to Florida, you could beat Virginia Tech, Ball State, and everyone's just going to go, okay, you're doing what you're supposed to do. But then you played a team that's even close to your talent level, even relatively near you talent-wise, and you lost that one. And I think that's a hard case to make. Even if you beat Florida State, then it's like, okay, well, you went 1-1 against teams that you're even maybe relatively close to. Florida, though, you get all those opportunities to prove yourself after that. You get to run the gauntlet of teams that you're going to be underdogs in a lot of those games. And so I'm torn there. However, for Florida, if you lose that Miami game at home, are you good enough to win any of those other games at that point?
Yeah.
I think that's where I get kind of torn on it, because while Florida will have more opportunities to prove themselves, if you lose that game, you're probably you mentioned, Miami is not Florida's toughest game. I think Miami might be Florida's 7th, 8th, 9th toughest game. And it's not even a knock on Miami. That's not even a knock on Miami. You got Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, Tennessee, Texas A&M. You play, 9 ranked opponents this year? Like, it's not even a knock to say, hey, yeah, they might be your 7th, 8th, 9th toughest team. I think that's where it's tough for me to kind of gauge that of who needs it more. I think when you look at simply in-state recruiting battles, that's a tough one too, because we've heard so many recruits are just openly telling Florida, hey, I need to see you win games before I commit to you. And having that in-state, hey, we're better than them, is going to come into it in a huge way. I think I've been on the fence about it. I've said, I think maybe Miami needs it more because you don't get to prove yourself. But Florida, as far as you need to tell recruits, hey, we can win games, I do think that you especially have to do that early on, because I don't think you're going to do that late in the schedule. So I think I'm shifting from it's more important to Miami because you don't get to prove yourself to it's more important for Florida, because if you can't beat Miami, you can't beat those other teams that are also really good. And if you can't beat Miami, you lose early momentum as far as flipping some guys who have said, hey, I need to see you win games.
I think I'm with you, just from, like you're saying, the fact that for as much as it's on the Miami side of it, it would feel like a catastrophe to lose that game. But then at the same time, Florida loses that game, it doesn't get any easier after that, right? Whereas if Miami loses that game, it does get easier for the next several weeks. You have more opportunities to bounce back. I want to get into some fall camp stuff. Now, on the Miami side, knock on wood, Miami seems to be pretty fortunate to this point in avoiding injuries. We'll talk about the flip side of that in a bit with Florida. Big storyline so far from Miami fall camp. This is something I've seen going back to spring, and this is going to be critical when you have a new quarterback running your offense, whereas Florida has the stability under Graham Mertz for a second year. Miami's got a new guy in town in Cam Ward. Now, Cam Ward was someone who was very wanted by Miami, very wanted by a ton of programs around the country, and the importance of building fast chemistry with his teammates. Ward has been doing that since arriving in January. He's really meshed well with top wide receivers like Xavier Restrepo coming off a 1,000-yard year, Jacoby George coming off nearly a 900-yard year, Sam Brown, who transferred in from Houston, had over 800 yards receiving last year. Isaiah Horton is another receiver Miami is hoping that will break out this year. Another big transfer on the offensive side of the football for Miami is running back Damian Martinez. He reportedly ran for a 60-yard touchdown early on in the scrimmage last Saturday that Miami held, the top secret scrimmage. That detail has emerged recently. And, as far as what could really be the strength, even beyond some of these playmakers on offense, what should be the strength of Miami's defense is the pass rush. right? There are question marks about the defensive secondary because of their youth, but the pass rush expected to compensate for some of that. Ruben Bain heading into his second year after leading Miami in sacks as a true freshman last year. Hurricanes added the likes of Elijah Alston from Marshall, Tyler Barron from Tennessee in the transfer portal. Akeem Mesidor, who led the team in sacks 2 years ago, is healthy again, and he's been one of the top training camp performers so far. So the pass rush seems to be on the rise for Miami. You look at it from the Florida side, Brandon, and if you want to start with the injuries, because there have been some well-publicized ones there, and maybe get into what have been the good storylines from camp.
Yeah, Montreal Johnson, starting running back, meniscus injury was the report. He got his knee scoped. They've said week to week. To me, I don't know. I know that when he got injured, I said, I think like 6 to 8 weeks it'll be the expectation. They said week to week, and a lot of Florida Gators fans went, "You idiot! Not 6 to 8 weeks. It's week to week." I don't view that as far off. I don't know. When you say, "Hey, we need to evaluate him every week instead of every day," I don't look at that as a super positive sign, which I could be wrong in. It's just how I view things. But I also said, hey, when he gets hurt, I'm lying and I'm telling people 3 to 4 weeks so that Miami has to prepare for him at least. Which, hey, by all accounts, he's pulling sleds in practice. He's sprinting in practice. Maybe he is really going to be available. By all accounts, he's working for the very brief viewing period that media gets during practice. He is working, so maybe he will be available. Backup nose tackle Jamari Lyons out for the year. Unfortunate injury that happened in the scrimmage early on in the scrimmage last week. Outside of that, few minor injuries, but nothing that we're expecting to really hold out throughout the remainder of camp and throughout that Miami game. So the injuries that did happen suck. But for the most part, you've been able to keep relatively healthy. And then, I mean, good storylines. You can throw the ball further downfield. Your tackling is significantly improved. Florida had 116 missed tackles last year per Pro Football Focus. Miami had 109. The big difference, Miami played another full football game over Florida. Florida had more missed tackles than Alabama, who played 2 more games than they did. There were a lot of missed tackles on this defense, and in all fairness to Florida, a lot of the guys that missed those tackles are no longer on your roster. Kind of sent them elsewhere. You get to play them in week 3 against Texas A&M, Florida. I'm just saying, you get to play some of those guys that missed quite a few of those tackles. So I think that you'll see a much improved team. I think linebacker play is going to be a big difference maker, which I understand it is maybe the least valuable position in all of football right now at linebacker. But when you watch like the Kentucky game last year and you see defensive linemen holding their block or doing their job and filling their gap, and then a linebacker just shooting the wrong gap entirely, yeah, that sucks. I think linebacker play is significantly improved. A lot of guys seem healthier. Will Harris is the secondary coach. Gerald Chapman is the defensive line coach. Ron Roberts is the linebackers coach. Significant improvement. That's my main reason for optimism. I think that your coaching staff got a lot better this offseason for Florida. So I think that when you look at what's good, you've got those improvements in key areas. Like, I don't know if you know this, Donno. Tackling's important in football.
I've heard that, yeah. Especially now when they can't practice tackling nearly as much. Like 20 years ago, every practice was like a game. Now it's like, are they wearing pads today? Who's wearing the non-contact here? It's a whole different world.
Yeah, now you get to tackle. They're tackling the tackling ring. They're doing a hell of a job tackling the tackling dummy. But yeah, I think that again, just from a technical standpoint, they've really ramped up their tackling efforts, technique, angles. Because if you watch the LSU game, they were not taking good ones at all. So I think that's one of the most promising things for Florida as far as what's going well in training camp.
Well, and when we come back, I want to talk about concerns on both sides, and maybe Brandon and I will give a prediction. I want to note these will be prelim predictions because you and I, we're going to get together again, probably in Gainesville right before that game. So that's when we'll do our final predictions. But we've talked about what's been good so far in fall camp, what maybe has been not so good. So you guys want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of this Locked On Crossover podcast. I'll tell you what's good. The GameTime app. Guys, this is the only ticket app that Brandon and I use. We're getting the best deals on tickets, whether it be concerts, sporting events, of course, musical theater, comedy shows. And what I love about GameTime, one of the many things I love about the GameTime app is, since I'm a procrastinator, the deals actually get better the closer you get to the event. You could save up to 60% off buying last minute at GameTime, which is really a beautiful thing. And we still have Major League Baseball, of course, going on. I mean, is it going on still with the Miami Marlins? Questionable. But around the country, Major League Baseball is still going on. And GameTime is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Guys, I love also the panoramic view you get from your seat right there in the app before you buy. So you'll know exactly what angle you're looking at, it's especially helpful for concerts, I think, when you see where the stage is. The all-in pricing feature is a game changer. You can see all what would be hidden fees. They're no longer hidden. You see them up front, so you know exactly what you're buying at GameTime. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with the GameTime app. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use code Locked On College, all one word, Locked On College, for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code Locked On College for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Thank you so much for making this Locked On crossover episode your first listen today. He is Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. Brandon, and I don't want to make it sound like we're sounding any alarm bells during fall camp, especially when both Miami and Florida have like very limited practice viewing periods. But if we're going to talk about concern areas, on paper, we say this every year about Miami. On paper, the roster looks very good. I think one area that there's just a little bit more inexperience is the defensive backfield. Miami does have Daryl Porter, who had a strong season at cornerback. He's a fifth-year senior this year. Miami brought in a senior, I think another fifth or sixth-year guy, maybe, Mish Powell from Washington, in that safety unit. Outside of that, you're going to be counting on younger players with less experience, but a lot of highly touted guys. Damari Brown, former four-star recruit out of American Heritage, will probably step into a starting role this year. Jadis Richard, who transferred in 2 off seasons ago from Vanderbilt, I think it's going to play a much bigger role in the secondary this year. Young safeties like Jaden Harris and Markeith Williams, who were the understudies the last couple years for James Williams and Cam Kinchins, are going to step into bigger roles. There's so more inexperience there, and it leads folks to wonder, is Miami's secondary going to be a questionable unit? I'd say we're not going to know till we actually see them out there in games. But what about for Florida? Because I've heard some rumblings about the offensive line. What do you think could be the most questionable unit this year?
Yeah, I mean, I'll say this. On paper, Florida improved their offensive line the same way you go, on paper, Miami has a really good roster. Unfortunately, game's not played on paper. So that doesn't matter at all, unless you're playing paper football, which, by the way, I suck at. But I'm just saying.
Me too. I suck at that.
The reports have been that Florida's offensive line still has some areas for concern. I'm not as concerned as some people are, mostly because, and I've said this since I started covering football, I'll say this till I'm done covering football. I think for the offensive line, the most important thing is unit chemistry. It's not about having, like in the NFL, we have an all-pro left tackle, all-American left tackle. It doesn't matter if there's no chemistry. That one player, great. I'm a Giants fan. They got Andrew Thomas. He's a hell of a left tackle. Their offensive line last year was literally the worst I've ever seen. Second worst offensive line in NFL history, behind only like the 70s Eagles. So yeah, I don't care about having one good player or anything like that. I think that the chemistry matters. And for Florida, their struggles early on, they've just started practicing together. Austin Barber missed the spring. Your starting left tackle missed the spring. You're still trying to figure out who's going to start where, which you could argue good thing, bad thing, that you're still trying to figure that out.
Yeah.
I've said I'll give them middle of this coming week. And if you don't have it sorted out, I am going to be concerned about it. But with their camp kind of just getting into it with each other, I'm not too concerned yet. I'm not saying that it's going to be good. I'm just saying I'm not going to hit the panic button until I think it's an appropriate time. And when they've had 2 weeks and a few days at this point to actually practice together with Austin Barber healthy, with everybody healthy. I just can't buy into the panic yet. That's not a thing for me. It is a concern, obviously.
Yeah.
It was a concern last year. It's going to be a concern for me until you actually go out and prove it. I think they'll be better, but will they be good? They're one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL in college football last year. So I think that's going to be an area of concern. I don't like having Damian George at right guard. I understand it's easier to play guard than it is to play tackle. I don't think he was good in the spring game either. So I will say that, it's definitely a concern for me, but I'm not going to hit the panic button until I feel it's a more appropriate time.
Yeah, and what you were saying, it reminds me that one of the there's probably only a few like starting job competitions that are still happening at Miami, and actually one of those is on Miami's offensive line. They have not named a starting left guard yet. Still, that's probably Mario Cristobal coach team. Offensive line is probably going to be one of the strengths of the team, but between Matthew McCoy and Samson Okunlola, they're still competing for the starting left guard job. And we actually spoke the media just to Jalen Rivers, who's the starting left tackle. We spoke to him last night. I have no reason to think he's, being coy about this. He said that competition is still open for whoever's going to be playing next to him. So, well, I don't know at what point. And with, Miami, we may not actually know, Brandon, until we see who lines up for that first play against Florida, who the starting left guard is. Because I don't think they're going to sound the alarm and say, we got our guy. They're not going to make the announcement probably until we see it happen there. So, man, I want to sum this all up with how we expect this game to play out in terms of who wins. Are we thinking close game, low scoring game? Something I always look at, Brandon, this is the first game of the year. So both teams, there could be a little bit of rust, a little bit of sloppiness overall on both sides. Over under 54.5. Do you think we maybe gravitate towards that under, thinking first game of the season, the offenses may not be firing on all cylinders on either side? And who do you think takes this matchup?
I'm taking Florida. I know right now, I know all of your listeners are cursing me out for saying that.
How dare you?
I know. Crazy. And I've said this all offseason. I'm going to keep saying it. And I said it when Utah came to Gainesville. It's really hard to come into the swamp and win week one. It is. Miami did a lot through the portal. I understand that you had all spring for most of your additions. Damian Martinez, not so much. But I mean, if there's any position you want to add someone in the second window, it is running back. It's the easiest of, hey, you're running the ball. Have to learn pass protection and all that, but experience back like that, I don't think is an issue. But I think that for Florida, it's just, you're the home team. It's really tough to go into the swamp and win. It's why they haven't lost a home opener in something like 3 decades. Like, it's been a very long time since they've lost there. And I think that week one, it's Florida. I've said all offseason, if it's week 8, I probably feel differently about this, but it's not week 8. It's week 1. It's tough to go in there, tough to win week 1. And I think I got to pick Florida. I'm taking the under easily. I think that for 2 main reasons. One, I think that Florida is going to play ball control football. They're underdogs in this game. They've been banged up at some spots, specifically Montreal Johnson at running back. Even if you do put him on the field, you kind of want to kill clock a little bit, I think, and then just limit the times he's going to get hit. And then also, like you mentioned, week 1 offenses tend to be a little banged up, a little slower, or a little less explosive, we'll say. And so for Miami's side, that's how I look at it. I do think Florida's offense, I think they've got the leg up early because they've got the returning QB, returning system, returning a lot of their offensive starters. But still, I don't think it's going to be this explosive game where everyone's like, oh, well, Miami's running the air raid. Florida's got a year 2 quarterback. This might be 72-70, like Texas A&M LSU. Like, I don't think it's going to be anything like that. I think it'll be close, relatively low scoring game, probably somewhere in the 47-51 range. But I'm taking Florida. And if they lose that, just know my heart will be broken. My FanDuel account will be very upset with me. I've had that bet placed since early May when it was 130 plus 130 for Florida. But I got to take the Gators here.
Yeah, I'm going to co-sign with you on lower scoring. I'm going to take the under 54.5. I'm going to go with Miami with a close win. If I'm looking at, obviously the number right now is Miami minus 2.5. I'd probably I'd probably maybe go Miami on the money line because I'm thinking it's going to be like a 3-point game, which would make me hesitant to take -2.5. Miami is -122 on the money line right now. So that's probably the direction I'd lean to. And for me, it's like, obviously there are more uncertainties heading into the first game of the year, but I think Miami's going to be able to win more battles than not at the line of scrimmage on both sides of the football. And I like the aspect of Miami's offense where it seems to be a pick your poison type thing. It's been a long time since they've looked this well-rounded run to pass. I'm not 100% sure if Mark Fletcher at running back will be ready to play or how much he'll be ready to play, but adding Damian Martinez, I think was a big move for Miami. So I think they'll be able to control it. But at the same time, I respect the road environment. The Swamp is not an easy place to win. That's a big reason why I think it's a bit of a toss-up and why the game's going to be really close. So Brandon, we will revisit these predictions in about 2 weeks' time in Gainesville. Do you have any idea like where? Because I'm letting you organize all this stuff. Like, are we gonna be able to do a crossover episode out somewhere?
We're trying. We're gonna see if we can get something going in person. Worst case, we'll be around.
Yeah, exactly.
We'll still meet up. We'll still set something up. It's about whether or not we'll actually be able to record.
If we got a live stream from like our iPhones, we'll do that. We'll do whatever.
Yeah, that's fine by me. We'll figure something out to get something in person there. I don't know about you. I'm going down there. I'll be down there Thursday, early afternoon, evening time. So I'll be down there Thursday. We'll be able to set something up somewhere, and we will be around talking smack. If you want to fight, we could fight. We'll figure out.
Let's do it. Yeah,
why not?
I love it. Well, thank you so much, Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators. I'm Alex Donno from Locked On Canes, and thank you so much to Locked On Gators and Locked On Canes viewers and listeners for making this your first listen and your first watch today. We will talk to you guys again next time.